First of all, thank you so much for doing this interview this afternoon.
Well, you're
I really
more than
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Sure enough.
And it's so wonderful to come to Muscle Shoals, not only because of the respect that so many people like myself have for the music and the understanding of, what went on and the significance of the history of it and how it really changed the world, but to come here now and to find such a vibrant scene that you're so much a part of.
Yeah, it is sort of strange, that I guess the majority of the stuff was done in the late 60s and through the 70s and maybe some part in the 80s, but it seems to me like the more popular Muscle Shoals became as a place to go record, the less people wanted to come here, because the main reason why musicians came here is because aside from recording, there was nothing else to do. Or go see the Moonshiner. You could do that, 2 knocks and a wait and 3 knocks and then one more, and the guy'd come to the store with a shotgun in his hand and, yeah, what do you want, And, but I mean that, there was no liquor, there was no movie theaters, there were no, elite restaurants or anything like that. You went out to eat, you got a burger, you got a hot dog, something like that, just the fact that it was so off the beaten path is why a lot of people came here. Not to say that Jerry Wexler didn't have a little something to do with it, but it really was the reason why a lot of people came here.
How long have you been part of this scene now?
Well, I came up here in a band I was in called Cowboy, which was out of Macon, Georgia, and we were working on our second album, I guess, which was, and it's either 1970 or 1971, depending on who you talk to. I'm going with 1970. And the studio over in Macon had just got a devil in it or something. Every time we started to record, something would go wrong. We'd have to go out in the waiting room, and they'd call the guy up that built the console, who lived in Athens, Georgia, which was an 80-mile drive, and we'd sit around and wait for him to get there, and he'd go into the studio and crawl up underneath the console and come out and go, all right, it's working, don't ever call me again, block, And after about the 4th time we had to do that, Johnny Sandlin went to Phil and said, Phil, please let us go to Muscle Shoals, please. This is, everybody's getting driven crazy by all the stuff that's going on here. And it makes a pretty good story. We came over here, and about the 3rd day we came over here, something went bluey in the console here, and we were all going, oh no, here we go again, and they called up this fellow, I think it was a Schlesinger. There was a Schlesinger console, if it sounds like anything. Anyways, he lived up in Ohio, and he flew down here with his assistant, and he opened up the bottom of the console and looked at all the 2,000 wires that were running under there, and he pointed over that way to a purple wire, and he told his assistant, he said, wiggle that wire. And the guy wiggled it, and everything came back on. He closed it up and flew back to Ohio. But that was my first experience with Muscle Shoals, and it's kind of a magical place, and I hate to use magic too casually, but when you hear the grooves that the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section was getting out of here, it's just like, good God, how'd they do that? And said, in one day, that's how they did it. And they'd cut a whole record in one day over here. And I mean, it took us at least, I'd say probably 2 weeks, maybe up to a month or something to do things over there. And of course, everybody does things differently. But, the thing is, and the reason why they cut an album in one day is because there's nothing else to do here except go in the studio and play and come up with your part and then learn your part and then punch the red button. That's it.
Well, You've had a wonderful association with the Allman brothers, Greg and Dwayne Allman.
I have.
And you were together in a band the 31st of February.
That's correct.
And just curious how far your relationship with them go back.
Yeah, well, I met Dwayne when I was in that band the 31st of February. We changed our name 3 times in 2 years. We were being called the Bitter End, I-N-D, period. And we were looking for a job down in Daytona. We all lived in Jacksonville, which is a little bit north of Daytona. And the standard thing for a college kid to do during the summer was get a job at the shipyards, which was not a good job. There were plenty of people there with legs and arms and fingers missing. It's a 2-ton propeller falls on you. It ain't real good. So, anyways, we were desperate. We the last place we auditioned was the Pier in Daytona, and we played a great set. And it was me and Butch and a bass player named David Brown, but we were a trio. And the guy came up to us that owned the club afterwards, and he went, "Man, y'all are great." He said, "I wish I could hire you, but I just can't." And we went, "Why not?" People stood up and applauded for us. "What's the matter?" He said, "Well, I just don't hire 3-piece bands." And this was before Cream, before Jimi Hendrix Experience, before any rock trio bands, So he wouldn't hire us, and we were all mumbling around and walking out of the club or answering our guitars. And some guy over at the bar said, "Man, y'all sounded great." And our bass player, David, went over to him and spun him around and said, "What's the matter with these damn people here, man? We played a great set and they won't hire us." Well, that person was Dwayne Allman. And so he went and got Dwayne, and they took us out on the town. And we left the next day and went back to Jacksonville. And about 2 weeks later, they called us up and said, "We've got you a job if you want it." And we were doing a lot of folk rock material back then. Bob Dylan and the Byrds. There were a few others too. But anyways, the guy that owned this club that we went and auditioned at was a Bob Dylan freak, and we did like a Rolling Stone, but we did all 4 verses instead of just the one that the Byrds did. And he just flipped out, and he would, "You're hired, you got a gig here forever." He just loved Bob Dylan. So that's pretty much our introduction to the Allman Brothers. And then, after the summer, we all went back to college, and Butch kind of went, "I don't know if this is what I want to do or not." And Dwayne called him up and said, "Man, let's put a band together." And he was gone before the phone hung up, it was just, "Yeah, let's do it." So he got into the Allman Brothers, and Barry Oakley and Dickie Betts were in a band called The Second Coming then, and they both sort of came as a package deal. So our bass player really never got a fair shot, to be in the band. And of course, Barry's a wonderful bass player too, I don't think I was ever considered because I was singing all the Bob Dylan songs, and they were going to be a blues band. That's kind of where they were at. It didn't bother me that much. It wasn't my wheelhouse anyway.
Yeah. But your connection certainly extends to this day. Some of the great songs that you wrote that Greg Allman recorded.
Yeah, the first album we did over here had a song that I wrote called "All My Friends" on it. And Dwayne was over here when we recorded that song. And he said, "I'll go play some guitar on that if you want." And we said, "Yeah." He went out and took one pass and went, "What's wrong with this song? It doesn't feel right." I said, "Well, it's in 7/4 time." And he went, "Okay, we'll run it again." We ran it again. He just couldn't figure out what to do on it, After about 5 takes, he took his guitar, popped off the end pin, and just let the guitar drop on the ground, and he went, I'm out of here. He'd never met any song he couldn't play before, And he left, and so Johnny Salmons was the producer, and he said, well, I tell you what, I'll get any hit and put a part on it, And I said, well, sure, he's the second best guitar player I know next to Dwayne, and if he can figure out what 7/4 time is, yeah, get him to do it. He came in and he couldn't get anything. So Tommy, my brother in Cowboy, he said, well, look, I've heard you sing the song a bunch of times. I know how that 7/4 thing goes, so I'll play something on it. And he went out there. He tried for about an hour, and he couldn't get nothing either. And, I mean, he kept saying, give me one more shot, give me one more. We gave him about 51 more shots, and then we went, come on in, man. It's no shame not being able to play on a song. So I took viola when I was in high school because I discovered if you were in the orchestra, you could get out of gym class, and which is the only reason I took the viola. But I took it up, and I wasn't actually too bad at it, So Johnny looked at me and said, well, you want to try playing the viola on it? And I said, well, I think I can do it. So I went out and did play a viola solo on it, and that's what's there now. And then Dwayne came to me when we were doing Laid Back 3-4 years later. He said, you know what? He said, I've always loved that song of yours, All My Friends, and I'd really like to record it. And I was just flabbergasted. I went, really? You want to cut one of my songs? He went, yeah, you got to do me one favor, though. And I said, oh, well, sure, man, anything. He said, you got to let me cut it in 4/4 time. I said, you can cut it in any time signature you want to. Just hearing you say you want to record one of my songs is good enough for me, And so anyways, he went in and we did, a really good version of it. We had horns and strings and, all that stuff. I'd never been involved in a production of that magnitude before, But I thought it came out great, Yeah. And then a few years ago, a fellow over here that plays in the Decoys, N.C. Thurman, and I started writing. We showed up like every Monday night at my house, and we'd write songs together. We did this for 5 or 6 years, and with an eye towards writing the song and getting somebody else to record it, somebody preferably who sold records. Because nobody knew who the hell we were, But anyways, we got into that, and we wrote a song called Silence Ain't Golden. And Greg picked it up and recorded it. And there was some sort of a kerfuffle at the end of the recording session. The song made it on the record, but you could tell that feelings were strained, But still, he recorded my song. I don't care how strained they were. That's cool.
Yeah. Eric Clapton recorded one of your songs.
Well, that was "Please Be With Me." That's the one that Dwayne played the dobro solo on the aforementioned second Cowboy album. And the best I can figure, Eric wanted to do something as a tribute to Dwayne. And he asked some people to go out and find him some songs that Dwayne had played on that people didn't know he'd played on. And they came up with Please Be With Me, and so he recorded it. And I didn't see him for about 3 years after the recording, and he came and played a show in Tuscaloosa. And somebody came and got me and took me to his show, and I had heard about 4 different versions of how he got it. A secretary at the Criteria Studio was saying, yeah, I remembered your name because y'all came down and recorded before the Allman Brothers, and so I recommended your song, and then somebody else, one of his roadies, said that he heard it somewhere and he recommended it. And there were 3 or 4 different stories going around. So I was going backstage to see Eric Clapton. I was like, aha, I'm finally going to get the story, And I sat down back there and we talked back and forth for a while. And finally I said, I've just got to ask you, man. I said, how did you come to record Please Be With Me? And he said, I don't know, somebody recommended it to me or something. I don't remember. I went, what? Yeah.
One of the pleasures of coming to the Muscle Shoals area is to see the Decoys. And what a wonderful experience that is to see yourself and David Hood.
Well, tell a few people about us, you know. I mean, all the people around here always call us the Muscle Shoals House Band, you know. I mean, and that's all well and good, but the Muscle Shoals House Band doesn't get paid as much money as, you know, Delbert McClinton's opening act or something. You know, I'd love to do a tour somewhere. And, you know, I mean, I've had several people tell me, and I agree with them, it's one of the best bands they've ever heard. You know, I mean, and I agree with them. I mean, I'm not trying to get the big head or nothing, but you're not going to find a better guitar player than Kelvin Holly. You know, there may be some around that are just as good, but you're not going to find anybody better. And how could you possibly ask for a better bass player than David Hood? You know, that just doesn't make any sense, you know. He played two of the most recognized bass licks on the Staple Singer stuff, that doom 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 doom, you know, and doom 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 doom.
Respect yourself.
You know, I mean, you know, those are two of the best licks I've ever heard, you know, and one of the reasons why they're good is because anybody can play them, you know, but David Hood thought of them, you know. I mean, he came up with them, and so I give him all the credit in the world, you know. And the band is, there's lots of things about the band that are kind of unique because, for one, everybody in the Decoys makes their living doing something else. You know, I mean, you know, playing sessions, working on the road with somebody. But we play so little together that when we get together for a gig, everybody in the band's always glad to see each other. Hey, man, how you doing? How you been? You know, I mean, that's not a typical band reaction when people in bands see each other, you know. If they're playing together 5 nights a week, it's like, he's still here, huh? Okay. Yeah. You know, I mean, that's just how it is.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, Scott. And I just want to say that it's such a thrill to be in the Shoals area while, you know, the WC Handy Festival is going on, and to visit the Alabama Music Hall of Fame, and to see the recognition for the Swampers at the Marriott Hotel.
Oh, Lord, yeah.
Beautiful lounge with hundreds of photos.
I mean, and you got to remember that this, before somebody put a recording studio here, which they built above a drugstore in Florence, this was a farming town. And half the people here now would just as soon none of this music had ever happened. They're Southern Baptists. Music is the devil's work. And, you know, that's just how they feel, you know. And it's an enigma to me how, you know, how it all got started. I mean, it was so strange, you know, that the history of music, and I've been involved in it pretty much since the beginning, but you started off with a mono recorder. You know, you had one track, and you had to record everybody. So if you had the mic in the middle of the room, you had the vocalist 2 steps back, you had the bass player and the guitar player about 5 steps back, and you had the drummer on the other side of the room. And you had the female vocalists over here somewhere about 10 feet from the mic. You know, there was no mixing, you know, after the song was cut. There was nothing you could do, you know. I mean, so they'd get people to stand where they thought they would have the level, the loudness that the producer wanted them to have. Then they came up with stereo recording, and although that's kind of a misnomer, because actually they would record on one track and then dump that track to the other track while they were putting another instrument on it. And then they would dump that back to the original track while they were putting another instrument on it. It wasn't really stereo, you know what I mean? But then 4 tracks came out, And we were like, holy cow, 4 tracks, man. You know, what are we ever going to do with 4 tracks? You know, I mean, and then 8, then 16, 20. You know the rest of the story. You know.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, Scott. Really
Sure enough,
appreciate it.
man.
All right.